Gary, Indiana, October 14th, 1988. The house on the corner of Monroe Street and 23rd Avenue had belonged to the Wilson family since 1952. Three bedrooms, a detached garage, and a back room that Jimmy Wilson had converted into something the neighborhood kids simply called the studio. It wasn't much. Egg carton foam on the walls, a second-hand upright piano that went flat on anything above middle C, and three folding chairs. But the door was always unlocked on Tuesday afternoons and Saturday mornings, and Jimmy never charged a cent. Jimmy Wilson died in February, lung damage from 28 years at the Inland Steel Mill, though the mill had already closed 2 years before he did. His doctors were careful about which one they blamed. Dorothy Wilson was 62 years old and had spent the months since then sitting across from bank officers. First one, then another, then a man who drove in from Chicago with a folder on the passenger seat and a job title that had 3 words in it. The mortgage had been restructured twice. Dorothy had missed 5 consecutive payments. The property would go to public auction on the 14th of October, and there was no legal mechanism left to delay it. She had gone through Jimmy's papers enough times to know the numbers by heart. She didn't contest it. Her daughter Angela, 22, had been splitting her time between a friend's couch and her childhood home since September. She worked doubles at a diner off Route 20 and came back on weekends to help her mother sort through things. What could be sold, they sold. What couldn't, they boxed. On the morning of the auction, Angela put on her father's old cardigan. The sleeves reached her knuckles. She rolled them 3 times. Richard Doyle had driven in from Chicago the evening before and stayed at a Holiday Inn off the interstate. He was not a man who drove places he could fly, which told you something about how seriously he was taking this particular one. Doyle worked acquisitions for a development firm that had been buying distressed residential property in Northwest Indiana since 1986. Quietly, methodically. Gary had been losing population for a decade. Factories shuttered, families relocated, whole blocks emptying out. When a city loses enough people, the math on land changes completely. What nobody wants today, someone will want in 15 years if you have the capital to wait. Doyle had the capital. He had done this 31 times in 2 years. The Wilson house was number 32. He arrived at 9:30. Walked the perimeter, noted the fascia pulling away from the gutters on the north side, wrote down the square footage of the garage that wasn't in the original listing. He did not introduce himself to any of the neighbors gathering in the yard. Earl Simmons had been running foreclosure auctions in Lake County for 11 years. He had a system. Arrive early, set up the podium, read the legal description, open the bidding, close it, write the receipt, drive home. He did not make small talk. He had learned early that the neighbors always showed up to these things and always made you feel like the worst person in the room, even though you were just the one holding the microphone. By 10 o'clock, there were close to 40 people in the yard and along the sidewalk. Some of them Dorothy knew by name. Some she recognized from the block, from Jimmy's church, from the elementary school Angela had attended. Nobody was talking much. There wasn't a lot to say. Earl read the legal description in the voice of a man who has read the same document too many times in 1 year. Property address, lot dimensions, square footage, outstanding debt. Then he set down the papers. "We'll open the bidding." The yard went quiet. Doyle raised one finger off his jacket lapel. 18,000. He said it without looking up from his notepad. The outstanding debt was $23,000. 18,000 meant the bank absorbed the gap. Dorothy walked away with nothing, and Doyle's firm picked up a corner lot in Gary for less than the price of a new car. It was not a generous number. It wasn't meant to be. It was meant to be the only number, which in Doyle's experience, it always was. People did not bid against each other at these auctions when the person losing the house was standing right there in the yard watching them do it. The rule was unspoken because it never needed to be spoken. 18,000 once, Earl said. Angela's hand found her mother's arm. Dorothy looked at the ground. 18,000 twice. The sound came from the far end of the block. Nobody had paid much attention to the dark blue sedan parked at the corner. It was a rental, unremarkable. A man leaned against the front fender. Canvas jacket, baseball cap pulled low, surgical mask. October in Gary was cold. Flu season had started. It wasn't a remarkable thing to see. What was remarkable was that he raised his hand. 28,000. Doyle turned all the way around. The man hadn't moved off the car, still leaning, one arm resting on the roof, relaxed in the specific way of someone not worried about how things are going to go. His voice had carried cleanly down the block. Not loud, just placed with the precision of someone who has spent a lifetime understanding how sound travels through space. Earl Simmons squinted down the street. I have 28,000. Sir, if you could come up to the... I can hear you fine from here. Doyle straightened. He looked at Earl, then back at the man on the car. 31. 35. No pause between them, not even a breath. The counter had come back before Doyle had finished lowering his hand. Curtis Bowen, who had lived across the street from the Wilsons for 19 years, leaned over to the woman beside him and said something low. She shook her head. She didn't know who it was yet either. Doyle took out his phone and made a call. He kept his back to the yard. About 90 seconds, then he turned back around. 39. 43. The number landed in the yard like something physical. $43,000 on a $23,000 debt meant Dorothy Wilson would receive a check. A real one. Enough to matter. Angela looked at her mother. Dorothy was still watching the far end of the block, her expression unreadable. The expression of someone watching something happen that they don't yet have a category for. Doyle made a second call. It was shorter. When he ended it, he put the phone in his pocket and didn't reach for it again. He looked at Earl. That's my final. He said it the way people say things they want to sound like choices they made freely. I have 43,000, Earl said. He was standing straighter than he had been at the start. 43,000 once. The man at the car had not moved. 43,000 twice. Angela was holding her mother's arm with both hands now. Sold. The man walked up the block the same way he'd been standing. No hurry, nothing to prove. The crowd didn't organize itself to let him through. It just did. He went straight to Earl and produced a cashier's check already made out, drawn on a Chicago bank for $46,000. Earl looked at it a moment longer than necessary. There'll be change. I know, the man said. That goes to Mrs. Wilson in writing before anyone leaves this yard. Then he turned to Dorothy. The mask was down now, cap still on. Dorothy looked at him the way you look at something your brain doesn't yet have the right context for. Not because it's wrong, but because context takes a second. I don't understand what's happening, she said. Your house, he said. It's yours. That's not how an auction works. It is today. Angela still had the check. She looked at it, then at him. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone without an answer. The quiet of someone deciding how much of the answer to give. The back room, he said. The studio. The piano that went flat on the high notes. Angela went still. Your father used to let kids come in off the block, he said. Tuesdays and Saturday mornings. He never charged anything. He just left the door unlocked. Dorothy put her hand over her mouth. I was 9 years old, he said. He spent about 40 minutes with me one Saturday afternoon showing me how a chord could do two things at once depending on what you played underneath it. He probably forgot about it the following week. I never did. He looked at the house behind them, the siding that needed work, the gutters pulling away from the north eave, a house that had been lived in fully and cared for longer than anything around it. Jimmy Wilson was a good man, he said. This is his house. It should stay in his family. Earl Simmons drew up the transfer deed on the trunk of his car. He filled in the address, the amount, the date. When he reached the buyer's name, he looked up. Who do I put here? Dorothy Mae Wilson. Earl's pen stopped. He looked at the man, then at the blank line. You're the buyer. She's the owner. Write her name. Earl wrote her name. The bank officer countersigned. Earl carried the deed across the yard himself, the full distance, and placed it in Dorothy Wilson's hands. She held it without reading it for nearly a full minute. Angela took it gently and read it aloud, stopping once to start over. When Dorothy finally looked up, the man was walking back toward the car. Wait, she said. He stopped. My grandchildren are going to ask me about this day, she said. I need to know who to tell them. He turned part way. Cap, jacket, the rental that said nothing about its driver. Tell them a man who owed their grandfather a debt he couldn't pay any other way, he said. That's the whole story. He got in the car. Curtis Bowen across the street had placed the face by then. He said the name out loud, quietly, to nobody in particular. It moved through the yard the way names move at moments like that, person to person, in low voices, until it reached Angela. She looked at the car at the end of the block. It pulled from the curb, turned, and was gone. Dorothy Wilson got the gutters fixed in spring. She paid the remaining property taxes from the surplus left after the debt was settled. She never moved. Angela converted her father's back room into a proper teaching space by 1991. Better acoustic panels, a used upright that stayed in tune, chairs for 8. She runs it the same way her father did, Tuesday afternoons, Saturday mornings. No charge for kids from the block. She still teaches there. The deed is framed on the kitchen wall. Dorothy Mae Wilson, property conveyed in full, October 14, 1988. No lien, no mortgage. The buyer's name is not on it. He wouldn't let Earl write it down. Richard Doyle's firm acquired 9 other properties in Gary before the year ended. The Wilson house was not among them. He never spoke publicly about the auction. His assistant mentioned it once, years later, in an unrelated interview. Said Doyle had come back from Gary that afternoon, quieter than usual, and never explained why. $46,000. One cashier's check prepared before he ever stepped out of the car, which meant he had decided before he pulled up to the curb, before he leaned against the fender, before he raised his hand. He had come knowing exactly what he was going to do. Angela Wilson keeps the original auction notice in the drawer beneath the framed deed. It's gone soft from being handled over the years. On the back in her handwriting, written that same afternoon, while the sound of his voice was still clear, a name and 3 words beside it. He came back.